So today's speaker again, Alexander Johannes Edmonds, will talk about from Asimānum to Gaugamela, new findings in the historical geography of northern Iraq from Narām-Sîn to Alexander. And please, Alexander, welcome.
There we are. Sorry, the microphone went for a second. So thank you very much for attending this, our first talk. And thank you very much, Armando, for the introduction, for explaining this entire enterprise. I'm going to be talking today about historical geography, something which is sort of a strange art. Some people love it, utterly obsessed with it. Other people stay very far away from it. But it's a wonderful opportunity to essentially reach that point where history and philology and archaeology and all these other subjects meet to work out something which, for me, certainly from the very beginnings when I studied Assyriology and archaeology, it's treasure hunting, basically. You're trying to find where spots are on a map. But once you've found those spots, the most exciting point then is understanding what that actually means for us. So, I've given here very simply just this description that Armando had in our original sort of post as a description lecture series about how sort of philology and history work together. And through toponymy, through what a place is called, you can really see very fascinating insights into how a culture sees itself. Even questions of identity and ethnicity, as Armando mentioned, interest me very much. A very simple basic example I give at the beginning is the name of my own hometown in England, because as you can tell from my accent, I'm very English, which is today called Woburn Sands. However, it was only called so until the from the 19th century onwards. Previously, as you might see from this very bad photograph and from the map next to it, it was called Hogstye End. It was a pig keeping place. Now, what happened in the 19th century was that a man wanted to open a private boarding school for girls in the village, and so the name had to be changed. This is a very fascinating, just a little example of how place names can have and why they're changed can show us a lot about sort of morality. For example, in a Victorian society, you would not send your daughter to Hogstye End Girls' School, for example. Interestingly enough, of course, we always forget it, but the site of Sultan Tepe, of course, in Turkey, is most likely ancient New Assyrian Huzarina, and Huzarina means literally pig town, which is also interesting. Again, all of a sudden one stops and thinks about this. What kind of strange dietary hang-ups would you have, for example, let's say, would you, as somebody who kept a dietary prohibition against pork, as a modern Jew would, being kosher, would you live there? An interesting question is, I've been looking this up, there is actually a place, I believe, called Porktown in America. I have to remember the exact name. And interestingly, there is actually a Jewish community there who actively take part in the street festivals and celebrate, ironically, the fact that they can't eat pork, yet live in a place famous for its pigs. Anyway, from there, just some little sort of modern examples. I'd like us to go back instead to the age of when gods walked the earth, as it were. So I've chosen between Narām-Sîn and Alexander because both of them made themselves gods, and both of them had something to do with the region I'm going to be talking about today, as you might have seen from the title. And that's going to be as follows. I'm going to sort of take us on a little trip through these different sort of interesting questions now, which have sort of been thrown up by there have been some very recent, as many of you may well be aware, very recent inscriptions of certain places in northern Iraq, very definitely to earlier toponyms. And from this now, the enterprising historical geographer can start working out entirely new things, the location of various other sites. And from this, we can make a real step forwards, not only in the geography, but also I'd like to show in understanding the identity, in fact, of this region over a long period of time, the longue durée, which is what fascinates me personally the most. So you see there a nice layout of what it is we will go through: Shimanum, Gibney, Halahu, another strange one, and then what I'm going to make out of all of it. So let's begin then with what other people have worked out, not me, in the past decade or so. And this has been a very exciting time. As many of you know, or indeed may well have been involved in, of course, there have been a huge movement towards surveying in northern Iraq, essentially from about 2011 onwards, concentrating mostly in the region north of Mosul, but also stretching out beyond into especially the area of Sulaymaniyah. It was very, as you can see near the the bottom corner of that map there has been very intensively investigated. And of course, also the region of Erbil now. And this is, of course, tied to political considerations and similar, but it's also given us now an absolutely incredible resolution into the settlement patterns of this area. And from this, we can do things which we would not previously be able to do with the sort of, with the sources available to us as philologists. So it's a golden age that's coming of historical geography. And it's sort of more striking that so many people aren't jumping into the bandwagon with this. If we give an example here, the two sites I'm going to start with that we've moved on to, you can see here are Bisetki, which might be known to many people because it's become sort of corps célèbre for the findings there, and Giripan, which actually rivals it at this point with the recent rock reliefs which have been discussed there. The first of these, of course, Bisetki, dug by a Tübingen team, I was to some degree involved in the sense of more the surveying, the general region, has been shown for a very dramatic new finding of Middle Assyrian tablets being worked on by Bettina Feist, has been demonstrated to be Maridaban, later Mardaman. And sort of this tells about sort of maybe 20, 25 hectares in size as a total. It had a lower town, comes to about maybe 50 or something, I'm not sure, but really quite an important Bronze Age polity that by the Iron Age loses a lot of importance, but still nonetheless is really striking. Of course, excavations are still ongoing there. And I was very lucky during my travel stipend I just received from the DIE, which lasted 2 years, as Amanda mentioned, because I kept getting sent home. I was very lucky to see these excavations actually going on, where they're literally digging a palace and finding new cuneiform tablets at different levels, which is a very exciting business because, of course, it allows us to work out the exact chronology of the past. So the second one, to speed things up maybe because I've been rambling too long, is here sorry, it's popped. Come on, it's going the wrong way. Next point here is Giripan, which can now be shown to be ancient Talmus or Talmusa, which is a site which throughout all the time up to Alexander the Great almost has a sort of crucial point, crucial importance here. You can see that to the side, on one side we have this flat tel, which is why it's called Giripan, which is of course Kurmanji Kurdish for the flat hill. On the other side we see where these lovely reliefs now being worked on by the Udine team have been found, which are just getting sort of now all of a sudden a lot of popularity. So with these two, all of a sudden, the important point is we can start looking for other places. And the most important of these, the white whale for archaeologists and philologists for the past 30 years or similar, has been this ancient city of Asimānum or Shimanum. I'm going to show they're the same thing. And in turn, I believe really quite strongly that they coincide with later Shibaniba, which is Tabilla. And this, as I'd like to show you, will have big consequences for how we understand, indeed, the first half of Mesopotamian history, in fact. The first point here is that we see the region was from the early Bronze Age to Middle Bronze Age, which is the point that concerns us in terms of Shimanum, Shibanum, whatever, is very fascinating because it's a place of, at least from the toponyms, and certainly to some degree from the text that one can find, seems to be a mixture between a Hurrian population, Amorite populations that may be more mobile, definitely not nubile, mobile, Akkadians as well, of course, and potentially, as we'll see in some place names, this is a huge issue, possibly there are substrate languages at work here. There are other groups that aren't Hurrians even or similar that are also sort of in this landscape for one reason or another. And trying to understand these dynamics and potentially seeing whether this reflects itself in some way in the archaeological record will be an exciting task, I think, for the coming time once we begin to finally establish some of these fixed points. So Shimanum, as we'll see, was very important in Mesopotamian history for the first half. It's been located in various places. A very popular movement has been to place it in the modern the modern Upper Tigris region, not very far away from, for example, Batman or Diyarbakir. We see here Uchtepe was one suggestion from Walter Salderberger and also others, which is the idea was that Shimanum would sound like Sinamum or Sinabu, an important sort of late Bronze Age and Iron Age Assyrian site. Modern Uçtepe, which has been excavated by Turkish archaeologists. Another move by Freyne was to place it at Sinanköy. He just calls it Sinan, which is just, it's an outskirts of Batman, that's just because he liked the name. But both were inspired by the Pir Hussein stele. It's very famous as stele of sort of Narām-Sîn that was found high up there. With everyone wondering why on earth the Akkadians went there, what on earth it must have been they were looking for. However, Astor placed it at Bisetki, which of course he couldn't have known then that we'd find tablets there and it would not be Bisetki that found it, but those are the previous sort of suggestions. And now we can start looking at the sources in the history, which is the part we're looking for. The first point here is that Shimanum appears first as Asimānum within the Great Revolt against Narām-Sîn. And also why I chose from Narām-Sîn to Alexander here, it's this great revolt that leads in fact to Narām-Sîn making himself a god. So in some way, this city is responsible for the first known self-deification in Mesopotamian history. And what's interesting here is that obviously this is the sort of main holdout of one of the rebels, a chap called Amagirid, who's the king of Uruk, but seems to have fled northwards to, I presume, a more welcoming place, whereas the other fellow conspiring king is defeated in the south by Narām-Sîn, and there he writes the Lords of Sabatu. Sabatu, of course, has been much discussed as a sort of a northern Mesopotamian toponym, but how exactly we place it during this period is difficult. It moves about, as it were, but clearly Shimanum or Asimānum, whatever, must be near Sabatu for this to make sense that he would escape there. And then thereafter, what happens is that he leaves Asimānum and goes to Sisil. Sorry, these are sibilants in general, I should be speaking out. And at this point, he crosses the river and goes on and he fights famously then a big battle at the Jebel Bishri. And yeah, that's the end of that. So these are the sort of points we've had to work out where exactly this could be. And so the idea was, if it's high up north in the Upper Tigris, then the crossing, there must be a place called Shishil or Sisil, sort of somewhere around modern Jizre or similar on Jizre Plain, and then you make your way to Basar, to Jebel Bishri that way. The other option would be that it's actually occurring in sort of the area I've just discussed and going to a place called Shishil, which we know more or less existed. It was later Shishlu through a lot of, until the New Assyrian period, which is maybe, it must be north of Ashur. So it's been placed around Al-Qayyara by Pablo and Porter, just because it's a good place to put it, in all honesty. Yeah, so that's quite good. But once we start adding the information from the Ur-3 period, then we get a much better idea where this city would be. And as we'll see also from this information, it really must have been really quite important. The first point, which is really quite ironic, is that we have so many attestations of the name because it was destroyed in a year, and that was obviously the biggest event, was that it was destroyed, as in the reign of Shusin. And here you see all these different writings occur. We have Asimānum, Asimānum, Simanum, and Shimanum, and it's quite clear this is this sort of early sibilant problem in writing the Semitic sibilants in Sumerian script. It was just really stuffed, however you do it. And the second point, interestingly, is this A, the sort of prosthetic A that sort of turns up at the beginning. Why this is hard to say. There are different reasons one might have for this. Interestingly, I've noticed when you look at the topography of the Zagros Piedmont, one always sees this sort of strange thing again and again throughout history. Why this is, I don't know. It could be the influence of a substrate language. So what happens then, and this is the most exciting episode that's been much discussed by scholars, is that this city or city-state of Shimanum seems to be the big player in northern Mesopotamia in a period of time when the Ur-3 state are trying to keep their hold of the area. And so diplomatic marriages ensue and similar, and the most important of these is that a nice little girl called Kunshi Martum, which quite programmatically means in Akkadian submit land, is sent as a bride to Simanum or Shimanum, as we wish. However, everything goes somewhat pear-shaped, as one would say in English, because this leads eventually, after a long period of time in which she still appears in the archives at Dreum, sort of in one capacity or another, accompanied by one son or another of the ruling king whose name was Pusham, I believe, or Busham, depending on how you want to sort of reconstruct it. After this, at some point, the whole place explodes into a huge rebellion. And this is interesting because if we argue it's the same place, as I think you've seen with the Asimānum, Shimanum, whatever, then we have the same site is where two big rebellions happen, once for Narām-Sîn, so in the Akkadian period, and once Shusīn thereafter. You might have noticed at the top of the screen, I'm leaving a little chronological marker the whole time. At the moment, we're at the 21st century BC to help you follow my argument, because in historical geography, one has to jump back and forwards quite a lot. What happens then is that this girl is kicked out of her residence, and similar, but then Shusīn turns up and sort of sorts things out. He sets everything right, but he also pillages the place and deports huge numbers of people, presumably the Shimaneans who have caused problems. And what's fascinating recently is that an archive has now been published by Benjamin student Hickman, 2018, where you see that thousands of unnamed Shimaneans can be found around the region of Nipper, really of thousands of them, but nameless. And these must be the guys who have been sent down. So we have this correlation, very fascinating, between a deportation which can actually be tracked. And if we can then attach this to a site, then we have the most exciting thing. We have a possibility, which I do not believe to my knowledge has been worked out yet for the Bronze Age, of being able to archaeologically follow deportation and how that might change habitation and similar, the structure of the settlement. We have this for the Neo-Assyrian period, but we don't have it for such an early date. So it's exciting. We've got to look at our definitions of deportation. Now let's do the more sort of number crunching-y bit, which I'll get through quite quickly. This is obviously just the listings of this different place. So we see very interestingly here, we have Shimanum. This appears and this is quite a long list, quite a well-known one, but along with a chap who's an Amorite called Naplanum, who's a very famous gentleman, always appearing in different places. But we also have the ruler of Talmush, who has a nice Hurrian name. And we also have a chap from Mardaman, which we've said now is Bisetki, of course, as well, who's called Guzuzu, which is an interesting name. It might be one of these so-called banana names that have been discussed in the past. And this could be substrate, which would be interesting. And finally, we have this place called Nikab, not really sure where that is, sadly. In a very interesting text here, and this says a lot, it's very telling for how we then prove where this site is. Shimanum turns up alongside Nineveh in the same delegation, and they're being looked after by the same mashkin, which the Drem text says something. It means that a place is associated, not only we've got the same guy dealing with them. Now, I can't talk about the length here, but the other point is, as Steinkeller has shown in 2007, that after Shimanum rebels, like I showed you in that previous text, what happens then is that Nineveh is very swiftly sworn in as a vassal. And the ruler of Nineveh heads south. First, he stops off at Eshnunna, and then he goes on down to Nippur, where all the swearing in was going on during this period of the Free State. And there, most strikingly, he turns up with around 100 followers, and he's made the new top vassal. Which then the exciting thing is this would imply, as Steinkeller very cleverly notes, that Nineveh was previously a vassal of Shimanum, so a second-tier vassal, as it were, which is very interesting as an origin story for what later becomes the most important, arguably, the Mesopotamian city par excellence after Babylon. And the two even get confused as late as Herodotus. Now he can't tell the difference between the two. So this is interesting. Once again, we have a text which seems to come straight after the actual conquest of Shimanum and the deportations, where we see again Herbara, which was mentioned as rebelling with Shimanum. We have Talmush, we have a chap called Rimanum, we have Nineveh, we have Urau, that could be a place up in the north. It's hard to localize. There's a lot of interesting place names in the lower Tiare, for example, a place called Ore, which I sometimes think could be it. Or there's other places. There's Musoni, for example, which appears in the Assyrian text. Here we see they all pop up together. And so with all that information I've just shown you, we can see that there are some problems with these previous localizations. So first off, there doesn't seem to be any tell around Sinan Koi, to my knowledge, that fits this. And the name Sinan is only known from the Middle Ages, and there are a lot of places called Sinan. You might know more famously, there's a village named Sinan in northern Syria. So the Shimanum to Sinamum swap, the metathesis suggested by Salleberger, at least implicitly, doesn't say it explicitly, is also messy. We'd rather not have it if we didn't have to. And to be honest, I don't think that the stratigraphy of which Tepe entirely fits. It has a very striking sort of late bronze and onwards, but probably not enough to carry it being Shinamum, and it's not, neither of these places are close enough to the rest of the action. Bisetki is great. The only problem is it's definitely Mardaman, which is a shame because, you know, you could fit the bronze statue. The wonderful bronze statue of Bisetki, very famous. You could say, it's that place, you know, and that's why he put it where his enemy was staying. So that's why he became a god. But no. Anyway, but what about Tabilla? Now, only one person to my knowledge has gotten close, which is a map, which Steinkeller has, where he put Shimanum near Nineveh. But then in the text, he never discusses this, and nobody's discussed it since. And it seems very mind-boggling to me when we look, indeed, at Tabilla. Here we see, I believe this flies in. Sorry if this is sort of frightening or sort of gets the eyes. Is it zooming in? Here we go. Tabilla is a very famous site in and of itself, very close to Nineveh. You can see it's an absolutely huge tell. As I understand it, I'm trying to remember the size. It might be roughly 40 hectares in size. I'm trying to remember what Petra Prima told me, but it's certainly absolutely huge. And indeed, Layard pointed this out when he first visited it. He says it's roughly the size of Nimrud, and he goes on about how absolutely wonderful it must be. However, every time that he sank trenches into it, not that much of interest came up. He was quite horrified. There was some nice monumental sculpture, and then it turned out a workman had actually carried it over from Khorsabad to impress him. But the mound itself, as you can see, is very big. Unfortunately, there's no evidence as of yet whether there was a lower town or not. Certainly nothing shows up on the corona photographs or anything else to imply it. But if we compare it to other Bronze Age sort of tells, like Bisetki, for example, we would assume that there would be something. If so, then this thing was a whopper. It was bigger than Bisetki, for example, in the same period, which we know as Mardaman and know as a particular status, or Geripam, which we know as Talmush. So this means this would have been possibly one of the most important sites in northern Mesopotamia, if it is Shimanum, at least if we're two fitted together. Now, obviously, it was very early identified as being Shibaniba. This was worked out by Forer in 1920. It was really, the chap was a genius. The fact that he worked this out without any, with almost no evidence, simply by saying it's a nice tell, that must be, and that then thereafter, of course, the Penn Museum excavated and immediately found an inscription proving Shimanum, only shows how amazingly smart Forer was. And in many ways, many of his hunches, which are unproven, I still think are probably right. But what's fascinating then is that, of course, as many of you know, of course, excavations were undertaken by Speiser, unfortunately never properly published, is the thing. And this is probably why this huge site has not received anywhere near enough interest, considering what it has in it, is that it was so poorly published. But when we see, for example, here, these are the periods that interest us for Shibaniba, as it were, only cover a small amount of the layers that were actually discovered. We see here the so-called Hurrian layers, which are probably Middle Bronze Age, more or less. We see also sort of Sargonic features and a Chalcolithic presence. And this is very striking. This is very kindly provided to me by this information by Petra Prima. And one sees, among other things, these photographs. There's not a huge amount of documentation, but enough to show that there was an extremely large fortification wall at the bottom of the town. That this is very sizable. And among other things, a well next to the wall, which went down at least 10 meters, if not deeper. And a lot of other sort of monumental-esque structures from the period, although obviously they're not very stratigraphically well preserved. Also a number of very striking elite graves. And just outside of the wall here, which may excite Assyriologists, just outside of that Cyclopean wall mentioned there, was an inscribed lance butt was found, along with a load of other weapons. And on it, you might be able to see possibly the sign Izzy for fire, in Sumerian. So somebody from the south of Mesopotamia was trying to attack this wall and probably didn't get away with it, although when one dates it to is another question. So all this is interesting when we shoot into the 18th century and we follow Ishme-Dagan, the son of Shamshi-Adad I, who conquers the area within the polity of Nuragum, as it were, and announces, I've now taken Shimanum Ninet, which, as has been shown very well, is in fact another name for Nineveh during this period and the surrounding region. And it's implied that he's done this very quickly, and so they must be near one another. So this means that Shibanum must be later Shibaniba, and that the ba at the end is just we in Hurrian. It's you know what I mean? It's just a sort of suffix. Oops. It's a genitive suffix. So, and B and M always swap anyway later on, sort of between Assyrian and Babylonian dialects. Now, this is really quite striking, that nobody then thought, hold on, maybe Shimanum might well be Shibanum. I'm quite astonished. I have spoken informally to colleagues that said it was often actually discussed, but for some reason, just nobody published on it. But anyway, we see also, by the way, it always appears in the Middle Assyrian period in the same spot. However, it's written with an M, has been pointed out to the point that Nicholas Postgate always writes now of Shimaniba or Shibaniba as such, but still for some reason Shibaniba and the documentations remain that way. So if we put this all together, just to finish our first sort of point where everything fits, we see that this fills up everything and it works out quite nicely. So with that, we'd have a fascinating situation in which a tell quite close to Nineveh was more important than it for, for the first half of history, essentially, as we have it. And what happens then, of course, is that a big deportation happens, all down to a princess, everything going wrong with the local dynasty, and thereafter Nineveh essentially profits from this and ends up becoming, most likely, over time, the most important settlement in the area, certainly, obviously, by the first millennium. It's the site non par excellence in the spot. And this whole rise to power essentially comes through arguments over a woman. It's interesting how history can work like that sometimes. Anyway, so moving on from that, we can get now this idea of these polities in this area from around the Akkadian to the Free period. And there's continuity, there seems to be, as I think I've shown, and one sees that they're all of roughly the same size, which is quite nice. And so the thing that sort of struck me after this then is, well, if we've got sort of this lovely line of polities running from Shimanum and Nineveh up to Herbara, which must be around the modern Zaho Valley, the question is, what have we got in the Navkur region? Because it's also been studied, obviously, very intensively now by the Udine team. They have this wonderful settlement distributions for, throughout history. And the question is, why would such a fertile area not have also been a polity? And of course, in fact, as I'd like to argue to you, I think it was something. I suspect this thing is called Gibney in Urfri texts, and Kigamlee or similar by the time that we get to the age of Shamshi-Adad and Mari. So that's the next thing I'd like to sort of show off to you now. And yes, I'm keeping to time, which is good. And we see here, these are the references I've collected of this rather obscure spot called Gibney or Gigibini or Gigimni, which has not really been discussed at all in academic literature hitherto. And thereafter, within the text from Tel Rimah, we see that there's a place called Kigamnim or Kigamlim or similar, which may well correspond to the same thing. And even in one Sargonic text, we have a rather strange place called Gigini, which I wonder, as I'm going to show you now, might not be the same place. And this is because it appears in the same text as a place called Sibani, which I then wonder, would that not be Shibanum maybe, no, in this period? And we see that these are huge tracts of land being shown here. And to me, then I stop and look at this thing, could this be conquered territory or something? No, these large distributions of land in northern Mesopotamia from a Sargonic text. I don't know. Zanaya is a bit of a tricky one where that's supposed to be, it could be later Zanipe or Zaniwe, or it could just not be. It doesn't matter really that much. The next thing it appears in is this list where we have Mardaman, we have Herbara, which we've seen as the Zaho plain. We have Dudulium, which is rather mysterious, but probably not far from modern Simurum. it's on the road to Sulaymaniyah, but where exactly it is along the way is a little bit hard to say. It might be at the very edge of the Erbil plain. I'm not entirely sure on that one yet. And in between, we have a place called Gigabenium. Then we see also here in this next text, we have Shimashiki, which is very well known now. Then we're in the land of Elam, which is much discussed. Anshan, yeah, again, Persia. But then we have Shimurum, or Simurum, sorry, which of course we know is more or less the plain of Sulaymaniyah. And then we move on to Shashrum, which we know very well is later Shushara, is modern nowadays it's underwater, Shemshara, in the Rania plain. And then we have Gibney. And so this is interesting again, because we do seem to have an east-west movement in this text, for example. We've seen in some of the texts, there seems to be a geographical pattern. In some, there's nothing at all. Don't ask me why. So this would be another appearance. The next one, nobody has clocked yet. And this is mention together of one chap from Gibney. And you can see if you look close up at the text here, this hasn't been previously sort of collated, but at least from CDLI, you can see it does seem to be Imni, surviving, and next to it, Shimanum. So this again, we can see there's a line missing. So Gibney must have been important enough that the name of the guy delivering, getting these sheep was listed. So with a ruler, a complex polity is. Now, if we move on to these other things from Rimard, then we see first off here, we have Kigamlee, and Kigamlee appearing again here. This is in a relatively well-known letter, I guess, which is written by the sister of the princess in Tel Rimar, whose name has evaded me at this point, but writing desperately to say the husband, Ami Tsura, is not there. He's gone to Kigamlee, wherever that is. We have the next one. This is one of these famous sort of wine lists from Tel Rimar. And here we have a delivery of men from Habaratum, which is essentially Habura in this period. At Kigamlee, we have another delivery from Tamush. We have one from Gumarasha, which is probably further north, but where exactly is difficult to say. It's a Hurrian name, certainly. And then we have wine from Shirwan, which is probably near Zakho, but on the other side of the river. So probably in northern Syria, often produces wine. Where exactly it is, I'm not sure, but it is the word for north in Hurrian that underlies it most likely. The final reference here is there's a place called Bu-Nineveh, which sometimes appears in these texts, but is difficult to localize exactly. It's from there to Kigamlee. So what do we do when we put all these references together? Well, we see that there's an NL alternation, which is quite normal, especially in Hurrian, to be honest with you, or to Hurrian style toponyms. I give examples here. We have Lulum, later Luluba, really quite well known. Nulum. We also have Mardaman, which ends up as Mardamal in Ugaritic, for example. This Ani obviously can be written as Li too. So quite frankly, I even wonder, why are they so interchangeable? Might it be because of place names and similar, in which, anyway, you can see the argument becomes circular. The next point is obviously the NB alternation I've pointed out already. As we've seen, Shimanum, Shibanum, Luluba also becomes Lulume in Babylonian times. But all of these, I think, underlie a rather striking word we get in Akkadian, which is Gigamlum or Gugamlum, or in Old Assyrian, Kikamlum or Kukamlum, which means a paddock or enclosed field. But to my mind, is probably a word from a substrate language, because it doesn't really make much sense to at least to an Assyriologist. What's interesting then is if we look at examples of what it is, because it's a noun, it's a thing, it's a paddock. And the first thing is we have a couple of these appearing in Old Assyrian texts here, in which Mr. Pushuken has left his asses at the Kukamlum. This is probably outside of Ashur. The implication is, this has been argued by many scholars, that there are Gugamlums all over, that every emporion on the old Assyrian trade route has one of these things, and it's a place outside of the city where you can buy and sell livestock for traveling purposes, pack animals, sorry, is what I mean with livestock. You can see again, this is very clear from the second text. But when we get later on, so here we have a text from the Neo-Assyrian period, published by von Soden and never discussed since, which is quite striking. It's really avoided much comment. You have a very weird situation in which a group of people, this is during a sort of odd ritual, circumambulate the Kigamlee 3 times. The girl scatters roasted corn, which of course happens in a lot of rituals. But then she also peels a dish of apples and does this thing again, ring around the Kigamlee, as it were. No? And this is very striking because it implies that there might be a ritual element also to this, that it isn't simply where you keep animals, but that it might have a sort of more ritual metaphorical concept of animalness tied to it. And this makes you wonder, something maybe some of you philologically might have already asked yourselves, if in fact underlying this, fine, it's a substrate word presumably, but there might be a folk etymology of Kigamlee. Ki, as we always know, site, something is Sumerian. It's a possibility, but I throw it out because of course the gamlum is the tool used by Amuru, and to some degree also associated with Shakan, who orders all wild beasties and animals, onagas, similar. This is only interesting I bring this up because we have some very odd, we have a situation later, not very far away, ultimately, where the relief of Milimurgi, which I'm still in the process of publishing, the thing is an absolute terror to publish. It's been years because it's so broken, there's a lot of holes in it, as you'll see. On this, which commemorates particular plays of the Third Conquering Era, quite famous, you can see here that in fact, not only is Amuru, very unusually for the first millennium BC, and Shakan mentioned, in fact, this is really striking enough, I'm writing an article about this, but also that you can see a gamlum, this crooked staff, is actually carved on it. And this is quite striking because this is the only example we seem to have, or rather potentially, but it's worth mentioning recently, I was speaking to Raphael Kaminsky about this, he has one interpretation of Gunduk, and it can only be one of many interpretations, and also the thing is mostly destroyed now, in which he thinks that possibly this strange figure you see surrounded by wild animals on panel 3 of the Gunduk reliefs, might well be Shakan. I don't know, very hard to tell, to be honest with you. I'm not an expert in the sculpture of the period, but this would be that we have now 2 sort of liminal places sort of on this same plane, which seem to have connections in stone with these sort of pastoral gods. And of course, nearby, if we have Gibney or whatever, Gaugamela, this might all be connected. This is just a thesis. However, I was not the first to come up with some of this idea, which is quite striking. Leafy was a very intelligent man, and he already points to all this here and says, oh, have a look at Gaugamela. Isn't that striking? No, I mean, that sounds a lot like the word Gaugamelum, doesn't it? And most interestingly, of course, there's this story we know from Strabo in which it's claimed that Darius I assigned the village to a camel, which is a very silly idea. However, if this had actually been a place that was associated with the idea if we sort of associate this with this notion of pack animals, then all of a sudden actually the story works, not as an etymology, but as an explanation, as a sort of memory of a previous use within this sort of, maybe this Mesopotamian trade. So, I mean, the question is, why not tell Gomel? And we have to look at that quickly, but I don't want to spend a huge amount of time talking about this. I don't want to blow all of your time. This is just Friday. If we look out here, we see it's a very striking, imposing tool, just to mention. And we see also here. Okay. Anyway, so apologies there. So if we see, we do have now this very striking alignment of sites, as I talked about earlier. And from this as well, if we look at Gomel, if we try and place Gibney there, and then Kigamlee, and potentially follow it with Gaugamela, medieval Syriac Gaugamal, and modern Gomel, and Gamagara potentially from the New Assyrian period, though it doesn't have to be the case, then we cover most of the layers that have been excavated there now, because fortunately, of course, this site has been explored by the Udine mission for quite a while. It being modern Gaugamela has been much disputed, but as you might know, there was a recent very large conference, lovely conference run by Michal Marchak on this topic, and he's published a number of papers on this, including line of sight analyses, which is quite fun, archaeologically speaking, And with everything else, this really seems to show that it is Gaugamela, that the southern identification that was popular for a while does not hold up to close philological scrutiny of the classical sources, and also especially the line of sight stuff is very striking. And the name, the fact that it's still called Gaugamela in the Middle Ages, according to Thomas of Marga. So if we put that there, it's a possibility. If we put it there, we'd have quite a nice alignment of these sites, of these polities that turn up with each other, and onwards one would get, for example, Shashrum and on to Simurum. Now, I want to bring up one other sort of place for you today, and this is Halahu, which has been much discussed, where exactly it is. And I'm going to sort of try a naughty thesis, a tricky new thesis on you, which cannot be entirely proven. It's conjecture, but could tie things together or might not work at all. It depends on the future. I think I've given you two now. I've given you something I think is very certain, something reasonably, I think, tangible. And now we go not really into speculation, but we go into something that's a bit more tricky. Now, Halahu was a very important province of the Middle Assyrian Empire. We see here's the Genau lists of these sort of offerings, of their modern offerings, of course. So there's actually often huge amounts of grain and other produce being shipped to the Assyrian core. And one sees here that Halahu always turns up right near the beginning of the list. After Kilisu, very strikingly, and Arbail, of course, modern Erbil, of great importance, and Talmus follows, Talmushu. Thereafter, one jumps to Idu, which is further off now. We know where that is now. It's Satukala, which has been excavated. We see, anyway, it's somewhere in the heartland, and it's quite important because it's always at the top of the list, in my opinion. Anyway, what's striking as well is that it appears, certainly, for example, in the Neo-Assyrian period, but I think also in the Middle Assyrian period, it appears as a city and as a land, as a Kur and an Uru, which is interesting. This happens with other places like Katmuhu, which is also Hurrian style. It appears as a place, which is later Shahupa. And so it has to be also, it isn't just a vaguer term for a province, but also its core. And this is important because in the Neo-Assyrian period, it is not a province anymore. However, the term is still used as a historical memory of a place. It's very similar to how in Germany, where I tend to live, I've been moving around, but I live there. I live a lot of the time in Swabia, but Swabia is not an administrative district. It's not part of Baden-Württemberg or a subdivision of Baden-Württemberg or of Bavaria. It's a sort of ethnic and language group that spreads across both of them. You can always identify a Swabian very easily because they're friendly but very tight with money and speak in a very funny way. And this does more or less correspond to where the Swabi settled down, those who didn't carry on to Spain and Portugal to do what they did there. And this is very funny because I think Schwabenland, Swabia, is a very good example of something similar to Halahu, where this term, this larger area, what it means, we'll talk about in a second, sort of was in historical memory thereafter, in the Syrian period, commemorated. Now, what does it mean? Well, Halahu has been much discussed. It's obviously not an Akkadian word. If we look, there is a word that's quite striking, Hawalhi, or similar, or Hamalhi, Halahu, Hamiluhu, we see here, mentioned in the Archive, which seems to be ein eingezäuntes Grundstück in German, so an enclosed piece of land. Now, one might stop and look. This is somewhat cheeky, but it is not impossible as an argument that, in fact, this is just another word for Gaugamela, which is also a paddock, is an enclosed space. We have two places that names mean more or less enclosed space. If we go on the reading of this word, which might be Hurrian, or could be a substrate word, it's Orit with two question marks here, according to Laroche, or it could be some sort of substrate word that's again been reinterpreted. What's very striking, as you can see at the top of this slide, is that we have a parallel development. We have Hawalhu, if we presume, becomes Kamilhu in the Old Babylonian period, which becomes Kalhu, modern Nimrud, by the Middle Assyrian, Neo-Assyrian period. And we have Hawalhu becoming Hamilhu to Halahu in the Neo-Assyrian period. And on the way, there's a place you might have seen in the text there going along called Hippilat, which could be connected to it or not. I leave that vague. But an interesting thing is this Kamilhu, Hamilhu thing, because we see also Halzu probably later becomes Kilizu, which is modern Kas of Shamanuk. There's another site that's been excavated. And there we have places with the same meaning, but for some reason there's a phonological shift. The ch becomes a k for whatever reason. And this is interesting because, again, this is probably at a boundary, as I'll talk about at the end, between Amorite and Hurrian, or Akkadian and Hurrian. It's possible there's actually something happening at the edge linguistically. But the other point is that there is one mention here in the Syrian text where one sees mention of a Hameluku here again as part of maybe a palace or something. It's hard to say. There we are. So from this, let's talk about where it could be. And the point is here, there's very striking, there's this Halahu or Der Sharokina gate to Nineveh, and then another one to Shibaniba. And now we've got Tabilla is obviously Shibaniba, as we've said. So the question is, this other one going to Halahu, this must mean it's more or less on the way to Khosabad, no? Der Sharokina. But the question is, how far away is it? No? Does it work for Khosabad? Could it be as far away as Tel Gomel? Now, this is tricky, especially because when I checked, the text it's from is actually quite broken. We only have Dur surviving, and the Sharokina bit we filled in. This is from the age of Ashurbanipal. So the question is, if Dur Sharokina is abandoned with the death of Sargon II, would you keep it as the name of a gate out of your city or not? I do not know. But there is one thing that could be a smoking gun. This has been overlooked, mostly because many commentators, including Arobag, have put it in northern Syria, as it were, or modern southeastern Anatolia, which I don't think has to be the case, which is the inscription of a governor at modern Aslantash in Turkey, Hadatu, who claims he is Nenota Belewutsa of the town of Sirani, of the city of Halahi, which is opposite the town of Lipapan, and the Aramaic says Lilaban, which is rather odd, can't be entirely explained. And I would suggest to you this could be the correspond to the modern and earlier Aramaic name, Syriac name for the Jebel Maklub, which is Al-Pap, which comes, they call it the mountain of the thousands, and this probably comes from Alaf, being reduced by haplology to Al-Pap. We see here, and one possibility then is that this might well be Gomel, simply because of the location. But it's hard to say. I mean, it could be much closer. There was one text found, the administrative text, that mentions a piece of land being sold in the land of Halahu, which was discovered itself at Khosabad. So that could be a smoking gun. Many take it as such, Postgate does. It doesn't have to be. And it's a question how close it is. But this is one possibility. And indeed, one does get the sense, if we look from this direction, or then also from Khosabad at least, certainly from Gomel, it does loom over, sort of place you'd say your opposite. And this would fill in this gap. And in turn, if we did this, it'd be quite fun. Among other things, the deportations that are very famous from the Bible to Helach, we could then more or less localize Halahu being around there. We can do this again, and these other texts once more. And what's interesting, of course, is that some very strange burials have been coming out of Gomel, according to my Italian colleagues, which are non-Assyrian, very peculiar cremations, though, which is odd, not what one would expect for Jews. But nonetheless, it's a very striking possible archaeological correlate. Do we actually have something from the Bible popping up here reasonably? The other final point is we can connect this to the route of Arshama, quite famous, this Persian official traveling through the countryside just before the period of Alexander the Great. And one see here, he goes through Erbil, stops by at Halah, carries on to Mat Talbush, which previously it still gets read as Matlubash, but it's not. It's Talmus again, it's Talbush, it's Giripan, the same place we mentioned. And this sort of mat element is the same as Mazamua one has, or indeed maybe even the Migdonis, I argue, that this is the word for land, obviously gone into Aramaic. So we have this lovely path, you can see like so, passing through the territories, and like so here. And if we imagine that it is in fact Helach, and as I understand it from colleagues like Rocco Palermo, actually during this period, the area around Nineveh was probably quite devastated and desiccated. Climatically, it was drier than today, potentially. And as a result, one might have taken a northern path just because it's nicer, then one would have passed here. And of course, if it's a Kigamlee, this is a place, a staging place, pack horses, animals, whatever. There we are. So could this have been then, if Gaugamela is Gomel, then would Alexander the Great just be taking the same route in reverse on the way to fight Darius? It's possible. I mean, Darius dictated the point of battle, but still, this would all tie together quite nicely. So let's conclude this. What can we say about the ancient Near East from everything I've banged out to you. And sorry, it all comes quite quickly, of course, and this is the excitement of the philologist having something practical to do in the realms of historical geography. Well, the first thing is we can create this sort of narrative now of smaller little peer polities, if you wish, I want to use this word, interacting on the fringe of much larger states. And this is already from the Akkadian period on into, as one can see, the Free period. I would argue, of course, Gibney, Kigamlee is still a little bit shaky. That I cannot shore that up entirely, but the remainder are pretty solid. That Herbara's, the Zako area, although we can't find it, it's probably been overbuilt by modern Zako. So if we imagine this is the case, then as I said, quite strikingly, Jonah might not have had to go to Nineveh if things had gone differently. If Kunshimatum had not had such problems with whoever it was she was supposed to be married to, and if Shusin hadn't have come in, maybe Nineveh would never have become important. It would remain just a small religious center. I didn't talk about the other context of its history, but of course, one could go on about that in the questions, and all of this would not come to a pass. So it's fascinating. This is an event in world history now can be recontextualized, this new location of Shimanum. After this, of course, we have a sort of large, but still very mysterious polity, Nurugum, which takes up much of this area. Don't know if the word's Hurrian, it could actually be substrate, who knows? And this, of course, becomes the kingdom of Shamshi-Adad, which later, of course, is the prototype for Middle Assyria. And in the very early patch, I didn't talk about this much at the beginning, one can see that we cannot tell yet textually or indeed archaeologically if initially, when Mitanni is over, whether they control the Navkar or not. Or at least I don't have the faculties to be able to decide this. This could well be by our Polish and Italian colleagues worked out. But there's this question where on earth Nigimhi sits. And it could be possible that this is another Gigimni, that something else is behind this, but I don't want to push that question too far. One sees Kumani and Musri up there. And again, this ties into this point I wanted to make quickly about language contact zones. And if we really look at this with some of these names I've talked about with you today, they're strange hybrids. This "an" suffix that one gets again and again is Amorite. It's a little, it means little or small. Now it's a diminutive, which is the same as Swabian toponyms. So one has le on the end of everything. And these B's that keep on appearing are in fact the W's of Hurrian genitives, which seem to be attached to place names. So this is fascinating. We have places that seem to be in some way, have this weird mixed toponymy. Titus, we have other places which seem to be rationalizations of substrate languages. And we have parallel evolutions, as I pointed to the last point, of the same place name going in different directions, which may well reflect a sort of language issue, as I said, this sort of differently impact of different hybrids. I'll leave you with a final point here, which is that this Lipapan, if I placed it right, whatever, is mentioned in late Assyrian sources, the canal building texts, as being called Mount Mutsri, which is rather interesting, because that more or less would mean border in Akkadian, borderland. This is very puzzling because it's in the heartland of Assyria. One also sees another Mutsri, later Mutsetsir, which is much more famous and well known, of course, which is up around sort of the area of Topsawa, Sidikan, or whatever, but also would mean border, because the local name is in fact Arin or whatever, at least the name in Hurrian means the city. It was a sacred site, Mutsetsir. So one looks at this and one sees this shifting of names. Is it possible that this is this interaction sphere moving northwards as the Navkur, which had previously been primarily Hurrian speaking, I didn't talk about it, but the personal names in Shimanum, in Shibaniba, until the early Iron Age is still to a great deal, about 15% Hurrian. Is this the movement of this toponym northwards of border, describing this interaction region to this spot by the end of the Assyrian Empire? And with that, I'll finish it for today. I'm looking forward to any questions you might have on this, especially if you're archaeologists and completely disagree with my reading of the data. Thank you very much for your attention.